Dr. Allen didn't gasp. He didn't slam the clipboard down or call for a nurse. He just stopped, read the paper in his hand one more time. Then he looked up at me, Earl Roger, and said nothing for what felt like 4 full seconds. 4 seconds is a long time when a child is asleep in your lap. 4 seconds is an eternity when that child is your 7-year-old granddaughter. Ruby's head was against my arm, her freckles pale under the clinic light, one shoe hanging halfway off her heel like she'd fallen asleep in the middle of running. Dr. Allen set the paper down very carefully and said, "Sir, how long has she been drinking this juice?" I looked at the half-empty box beside me and felt my throat close. "I don't know," I said. "Not long. I don't know." He lowered his voice. "This child has been sedated repeatedly for months." For a second I thought I had heard him wrong. Sedated was not a word that belonged anywhere near Ruby. Ruby was scraped knees and missing front teeth and questions that never ended. Ruby was 7 years old. Ruby was birthday candles and freckles on her nose and that stuffed elephant she dragged everywhere by one ear. Sedated belonged in police reports. Sedated belonged in cases. Not in a pediatric clinic on Poplar Avenue in East Memphis with my granddaughter limp in my lap and my hand still resting on the purple gift bag I'd brought her 3 days late. Let me back up 2 hours, because if I don't, none of this will make sense. And if you're listening right now, do me one favor before I go any further. Subscribe, leave a comment, and stay with me to the end, because some people think evil always arrives with noise. Sometimes it comes in a juice box with a cartoon grape on the front. Tuesday, October 14th, 2:15 in the afternoon. I pulled onto my son Daniel's street with my bad knee throbbing and a purple gift bag on the passenger seat. Ruby's birthday had been 3 days earlier, and I had missed it. I told everybody it was the weather and the knee, and that was true enough. But the bigger truth was that getting old teaches you to ration your dignity. Some mornings you can move like a man. Some mornings you move like a drawer full of loose tools. Tuesday was somewhere in the middle. Their place sat off Exeter Road in that clean, careful stretch between East Memphis and Germantown, where every porch looked staged for a real estate flyer. Vanessa had always liked things that looked right from the curb. Daniel opened the door with one hand and his phone in the other. He smiled when he saw me, but it was distracted, thin, the kind of smile a man gives when half his mind is somewhere else. "Dad," he said, "you made it." "Told her I would." I lifted the purple gift bag. Would have been here sooner if the knee wasn't arguing with the rest of me. He gave a quick laugh and stepped aside. I remember that part because it was normal. That was the last normal thing. Ruby came down the hallway fast, then slowed at the last second, like she had forgotten how to arrive at people. She stopped in front of me, looked up and smiled. "Grandpa." She said it sweet, but delayed, like a text message that took too long to send. I felt that before I understood it. "Hey, Bug," I said, crouching as far as my knee would let me. "Happy birthday, 3 days late." She took the bag in both hands and held it against her little chest without opening it. Most 7-year-olds tear into a present like it's a fire drill. Ruby just looked at it, then looked at me. "You can open it," I said. "I know the rules." She smiled again, but slow, too slow. Vanessa appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "There she is," she said brightly. "She has been waiting all afternoon for Grandpa's dramatic entrance." Vanessa always knew how to pitch her voice just right for company. Warm enough to pass, polished enough to slide off. Blonde hair pinned up. Cream sweater, everything in place. A suburban brochure with cheekbones. "Sorry I missed the party," I said. "Nee had other plans." "You being here is what matters," she said. Then she leaned down toward Ruby and added, "Show Grandpa your juice and say thank you for coming." It was a strange sentence, and I noticed it only because later I replayed every word spoken in that house until they sounded like evidence. At the time, it was just one more odd little thing adults say around children. Ruby was holding a juice box already. Straw pushed through the foil, grape smell faint in the air. She tucked the gift bag under one arm and climbed onto my lap in the living room chair, like she had done 100 times before. She was light, too light, and warm in that sleepy way children get when their energy goes sideways. Daniel sat on the couch across from us, answering a work message. Vanessa hovered in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, watching everything without seeming to watch anything. Ruby leaned close to my ear. I thought she was going to tell me about school, or the gift, or the little plastic bracelet on her wrist. Instead, she whispered, so soft I almost missed it. "Grandpa, can you ask Mom to stop putting things in my juice?" Every muscle in my back locked. I didn't move, didn't look up, didn't even breathe right away. "What was that, baby?" I asked, keeping my voice calm enough not to shake her. She blinked slow. "It makes me sleepy." Then she rested her head against my chest, like she had used up the last of herself getting the words out. I looked across the room at Daniel. He was still staring at his phone. Vanessa was gone back into the kitchen, humming to herself. I put one hand over Ruby's back and felt how limp she was getting under my palm. "Daniel," I said, "come here a second." He looked up. "What is it?" "Now." He came over, saw my face, and his own changed. "What's wrong with her? How long has she been acting tired like this?" He frowned. "I don't know. She's had phases. Vanessa said she's been harder to put down at night, so they've been working on a routine." Routine. There are words people hide inside when they don't want to look too closely. I looked down at the juice box in Ruby's hand. Her fingers had loosened around it. "How much of this has she had?" He shrugged. "Probably just that one. Why?" Before I could answer, Vanessa walked back in carrying a plate of sliced apples, like we were in a commercial. "Everything okay?" she asked. I looked at her then, really looked. No panic, no confusion, just a stillness that vanished a second too late. "She just got sleepy fast," I said. Vanessa smiled. "She does that sometimes. Sugar crash." She was excited all day. Ruby's body sagged heavier against me. Not nap heavy, dead weight heavy. I touched her cheek. "Ruby." No answer. "Ruby?" Her eyes fluttered but didn't open. Daniel took a step forward. "Ruby?" His voice cracked on the second syllable. Vanessa set the apples down too carefully. "She's fine. She didn't sleep well last night." I stood up with Ruby in my arms. Bad knee or not, I stood fast enough that the room tilted for a second. "Get your keys," I said to Daniel. Vanessa moved toward me. "Earl, you're overreacting." That word, overreacting. I heard it, filed it, and stepped past her. "Maybe," I said. "Then the doctor can tell me that." The drive to the pediatric clinic on Poplar Avenue should have taken 12 minutes. It felt like a lifetime packed into red lights. Daniel drove. I sat in the back with Ruby in my lap, one hand on her forehead, one around that stuffed elephant she had dropped in the car, without either of us noticing. Vanessa said she'd meet us there because she needed to lock up the house. I didn't argue. I didn't want her in the car. Halfway there, Daniel looked at me in the mirror and said, "Dad, what did she say to you?" I held his eyes for 1 second, then looked back down at his daughter. "I'll tell you when a doctor tells me what I'm looking at." He gripped the steering wheel until the veins stood up in his hands. At 4 p.m. sharp, we carried Ruby through the clinic doors. Nurses moved quickly once they saw her. Questions, weight, pulse. How long had she been unresponsive? Had she taken any medication? Any known allergies? Daniel answered what he could. I answered what mattered. Juice box. Sudden collapse. Child said someone was putting things in it. That got Dr. Allen's attention in a hurry. He was not a dramatic man. Mid-50s maybe, wireframe glasses, voice like paper folded neatly in half. He asked careful questions. He didn't waste words. He ordered tests, including a urine tox screen, and then he left us in that pale room with the animal decals on the wall while the minutes stretched into something ugly. Daniel paced once, twice, 10 times. He kept saying, "This doesn't make sense." This doesn't make sense. I sat with Ruby in my lap and said nothing, because I had spent 27 years as a detective, and one thing that job teaches you is this. The moment something makes no sense is usually the moment you are standing closest to the truth. Vanessa arrived 20 minutes later, hair fixed, lip gloss fresh, not out of breath. She came straight to the bed and touched Ruby's ankle. "Baby?" she said, but there was performance in it. Too much shape, too much sound. Daniel turned on her right away. What has she been taking? Vanessa looked offended before she looked afraid. What are you talking about? Dad said she told him somebody was putting things in her juice. Vanessa's eyes flicked to me. Only for a second, but I saw it. People can lie with their mouths all day. Their eyes still have to travel. She's 7, Vanessa said. She says weird things. She probably means vitamins or melatonin gummies. The pediatric sleep group suggested. The door opened, and Dr. Allen walked in holding the paper. Then he stopped, read it one more time, looked up at me, and said nothing for 4 full seconds. When Dr. Allen finally spoke, he did it the same way a good man handles bad news when a child is in the room. Quiet, precise, no wasted theatre. "Mr. Roger," he said, looking at me first and then at Daniel. "This child has been exposed to sedatives repeatedly. Not once, not accidentally, repeatedly." Daniel stared at him like language had stopped working. "What kind of sedatives?" he asked. Dr. Allen glanced down at the panel. "Enough to suppress her alertness over time. Enough to create dependence on the pattern. Enough that I would not treat this as an isolated event." He lifted his eyes again. "Based on what I'm seeing, and based on her physical presentation, this has likely been going on for months." Daniel swallowed hard. "How many months?" Dr. Allen held the silence for half a breath, then said, "At least 8. Vanessa made a sound then, not a cry, not shock, more like the air leaving a person who knows the floor under her has started to split. Daniel turned to her slowly. 8 months, he said. She shook her head before he even finished the words. No, that's not possible. She's had sleep problems. She's been fussy. I gave her what they told me was safe. Dr. Allen's voice stayed level. "Ma'am, this goes beyond over-the-counter sleep support. I need to ask directly whether there are medications in that home not prescribed to this child." Vanessa folded her arms over herself. "I don't know what all Daniel has in the cabinet. I don't handle his stuff." Daniel looked at her as if he had never seen her before. "My stuff?" he said. "You're saying this is my stuff?" Ruby stirred in my lap, made a weak sound, then settled again. I felt that sound move through me like a nail. Dr. Allen called in a nurse and stepped outside with another staff member. When he came back, he didn't ask permission. He told us what was happening. "I have already initiated a mandatory report," he said. "This child is not going home until protective steps are in place. If there is anyone safe besides the parents who can remain with her, I suggest that happen now." Daniel looked at me. Vanessa looked at the door. That told me more than anything she'd said since I walked into that house off Exeter Road at 2:15 that afternoon with a purple gift bag and a bad knee. I said, "I'm staying." Dr. Allen nodded once. "Good." Then he turned to Daniel. "Sir, I need you to think carefully. Has your daughter been unusually tired, difficult to wake, emotionally flat, dizzy, withdrawn, or more compliant than usual?" Daniel sat down like his legs had stopped holding him. "She has been tired," he said. "Vanessa said it was school, or sugar, or phases. She said she was growing." He put both hands over his mouth. "God." Vanessa spoke too fast. "You are twisting everything. She needed structure. She was out of control. She never slept. You were never home. You don't know what it was like." There it was. Not denial anymore. Just a search for a softer word. Structure, routine, help. People like that always reach for words that sound neat. They try to dress harm up in administrative language. I looked at her and said, Do not say one more thing unless it's the truth." She flinched. I noticed that too. Daniel looked from her to me. "Dad," he said, voice breaking, "what do we do?" It is strange what the mind does in moments like that. The room smelled like sanitizer and grape sugar. Ruby's stuffed elephant was under my wrist. A cartoon tiger was smiling from a wall decal by the sink. And all I could think was that noise would ruin this. Noise would warn her. Noise would give her time to erase things, delete searches, dump bottles, call somebody, lie better. I had spent too many years watching guilty people win the first round because decent people mistook rage for strategy. So I leaned back, kept my hand on Ruby, and said, "We do not confront her tonight." Daniel snapped his head toward me. "What?" "You heard me. She poisoned my daughter." "Then you want proof that survives a courtroom?" He looked sick, angry, lost, all at once. "How am I supposed to sit there and act normal?" "You don't have to act normal," I said. "You have to act useful." Vanessa stood up from the chair. "I am right here." I turned to her without raising my voice. "Yes, and that's exactly why we're not having this conversation in front of you." That shut her up for the first time all day. Dr. Allen re-entered then and told us a child welfare officer would be involved before discharge, and that law enforcement had been notified as part of protocol. He also told us something I never forgot. "Whatever happens next," he said, "keep the child away from any privately prepared drinks, supplements, or sleep aids. Everything consumed needs to be observed and documented." Documented. That word fit in my hand like an old tool. Daniel looked wrecked. He kept turning toward Vanessa as if some part of him still believed she would say the one sentence that could wake him out of this. She never did. She only cried harder when an audience was present and quieter when she thought no one was looking. By Wednesday, 6:47 a.m., I was in the parking lot behind a diner off Summer Avenue, waiting on a man named Ray Dobbins. I had known Ray a long time, though not closely. Memphis is full of former lawmen who learn how to make a living after the badge comes off. Some go private security, some drink. Some disappear into grandparenthood and blood pressure pills. Ray had become a private investigator with a gift for staying invisible in daylight. He slid into the booth across from me, wearing a faded windbreaker, and that expression men get after 30 years of seeing exactly how ugly family cases can become. "Earl," he said, "you sounded bad on the phone." "It is bad." I handed him a legal pad sheet with names, addresses, times, and one sentence in the center written hard enough to dent the paper. "Ask Mummy to stop putting things in my juice." Ray read it once, then again. "Child's age?" 7, Ruby. "Mother?" "Vanessa." "Father?" "Daniel, my son." He leaned back. "What do you want from me?" Quiet eyes, full picture, phones, purchases, habits, movements, custody prep, side relationships, pharmacies, aliases, anything that tells me whether this was desperation or planning. Ray looked at me for a long second and said, "You expecting bad?" I said, "I'm expecting worse than anyone wants to say out loud." He nodded. "Then don't call me unless it's urgent. I'll call you." "One more thing," I said. "She cannot know." "Earl," he said, folding the paper and sliding it inside his jacket, "if she knows I'm there, I quit." By Thursday evening, Ray had the beginning of it. Not enough for an arrest yet. More than enough to make my skin go cold. We met in his car 2 rows over from a strip pharmacy in Midtown while rain ticked at the windshield. He handed me a manila folder. Inside were time-stamped photos, printed screenshots, and a short memo in his blocky handwriting. Vanessa had been visiting more than one pharmacy. Small purchases. Kids' melatonin in legal quantities from different stores. But that wasn't the part that mattered. The part that mattered was the second column. She had also been acquiring prescription sedatives through someone using false names. One of them tied to a short-term mailbox in Collierville, and another to an ID trail that bent twice before it broke. "You said false names?" I asked. Ray nodded. "Clumsy but not amateur." She wasn't buying bulk. She was buying enough not to spike attention. And Earl, he tapped the screenshot clipped to the back. Look at the search history. I looked. Child custody when father works long hours. Can grandparents get emergency placement? Life insurance child beneficiary Tennessee. Symptoms of chronic sedation in children. How long does melatonin stay in urine? I read the pages twice, then once more. Daniel doesn't know any of this, I said. Not unless he's blind, and maybe he is. Ray's tone stayed flat. I've seen spouses run whole second lives under the same roof. Denial's a hell of a curtain. I put the papers back into the folder carefully, because if I had not, I might have torn them. Was she trying to make the kids sleep? I asked, or trying to build a story? Ray didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, maybe both. A sedated child is easier to manage, easier to isolate, easier to frame as fragile, easier to use. Use for what? Custody leverage, sympathy, insurance angle, control. Pick one. He paused. Sometimes people don't even know which ugly motive is the real one. They just keep feeding the behavior that benefits them. I stared through the windshield at the blurred neon reflected in puddles. Ruby at 7 years old. Ruby with freckles on her nose. Ruby climbing into my lap with a juice box in one hand and my purple gift bag in the other. I heard Dr. Allen's voice in my head, repeatedly, at least 8 months. Ray was still talking. There's another thing. She searched grandparent visitation too. That made me look at him. Why? Could be contingency planning. Could be because she thought if things blew up, she'd need to control access. Could be she knew you were a threat without knowing why. He let that sit between us. You ever tell Daniel about your old work? No. Why not? I looked back out at the rain. He grew up with enough shadows in the house. I didn't see the point in handing him more. Ray gave a dry little nod. Might be time to revise that policy. Friday, October 11th, had been one of the dates in the pharmacy log. One purchase under a false name, another under cash. Tuesday, October 14th, 2:15 p.m., had been the birthday gift, the whisper, the collapse. The pattern in between was starting to show its shape. Vanessa hadn't snapped. She hadn't made one bad choice on one bad day. She had built a system. Small doses, plausible explanations, gradual fatigue. A child made quieter and easier and stranger over time, until everyone around her accepted the dimmer version as normal. That was the part that kept me awake, not just the drugging, the theft of the child's self. Daniel came by my place that night after Ray and I met. He looked 10 years older than he had on Tuesday. He sat at my kitchen table and stared at his coffee without touching it. Social worker says Ruby can stay with you for now, if the emergency paperwork clears tomorrow, he said. Dr. Allen backed it. CPS is moving fast. Good, he nodded. Then he said, Vanessa keeps saying she was trying to help. Says I wasn't around. Says Ruby was impossible to manage, and no one understands what mothers deal with. I slid the manila folder toward him. Then read that before you listen to one more speech. He opened it slowly, read the first page, then the second. By the search history page, his face had gone the color of wet paper. Life insurance? He whispered. Custody? He looked up at me. Dad, what is this? Evidence. Where did you get it? From a PI named Ray Dobbins. He stared. You hired a private investigator? The morning after Dr. Allen went silent for 4 full seconds, yes. Daniel pushed back from the table so hard the chair legs barked against the floor. You already had all this moving and you didn't tell me. I told you what you needed to know when you needed to know it. She's my wife. And Ruby is your daughter. He turned away, both hands braced on the counter, shoulders shaking with anger or grief or both. I should have seen it. Yes, I said. He flinched like I'd hit him. I didn't take it back. You should have, but you didn't. So you can spend the next 10 years drowning in guilt, or you can do the next right thing. He stood there a long time. Finally, he asked, What is the next right thing? I said, You confront her once, with witnesses close, with law enforcement already ready to move. You do not improvise, you do not threaten, you do not warn her a day ahead, and when she starts reaching for excuses, you keep her talking. He turned around slowly. How do you know how to do that? I looked at him, really looked at him. My son, a grown man, a father, a man who had never once asked why I always noticed exits, why I wrote down times from habit, why I looked at people twice when everyone else looked once. Because before I was your father, I said, I was a detective for 27 years. He blinked at me. What? Memphis, 27 years. You never told me that. No. Why not? Because I wanted you to grow up around a man, not around a profession. He sat back down like his knees had given out. Jesus. No, I said quietly. Just paperwork, waiting rooms, statements, search warrants, the unglamorous machinery of consequences. He looked at the folder again. You already knew how to build a case. Yes. And you were doing it while I was still trying to understand what Dr. Allen meant. Yes. He covered his face with both hands. When he spoke, it came out through his fingers. I don't know how to forgive myself. I said, that is not tonight's assignment. We set it for Saturday afternoon at the house in Germantown, neutral enough in appearance, familiar enough to keep her from bolting before she heard the first question. Daniel texted Vanessa that he needed to talk about Ruby, about next steps, about lawyers, about whether they were going to save the marriage. People show up fast when they think the conversation might still orbit them. Ray stayed 2 houses down, in a silver Audi with a clear sightline. A patrol unit remained off the block until called. CPS had already coordinated with law enforcement because of the TOC screen and Dr. Allen's report, but they needed the cleanest possible handoff. Vanessa arrived exactly 7 minutes late and came in wearing soft colors, no wedding ring, eyes red but dry. She expected emotion. She did not expect structure. Daniel sat at the dining table. I stood by the kitchen counter. The manila folder sat between them. Where's Ruby? She asked immediately. Safe, Daniel said. You don't get to ask more than that right now. She looked at me, then back at him. This is insane. Daniel opened the folder and slid the screenshots toward her one by one. Pharmacy records, search history, times, places, false names. She stopped pretending by the 3rd page. Her breathing changed. You went through my things? She said. No, Daniel said. We went around you. She swallowed. I was tired. I wasn't thinking straight. Do not say you made a mistake, I said. She looked up sharply. You have no idea what it was like in that house. Then explain the life insurance searches. Silence. Explain the custody searches. Silence. Explain the false names. Her mouth opened, closed. Daniel stood up so suddenly the chair tipped backward. You drugged my daughter, he said. She started crying on cue then, big and messy, and almost convincing if you had not seen her do it only when cornered. I never wanted to hurt her. I just needed her to sleep. I needed her to stop. I needed one quiet day, one quiet night. And then it got away from me. Daniel stared at her like he was watching his own life burn in a language he no longer spoke. 8 months? He said. 8 months got away from you? She shook her head violently. Not like that. Not every day. I don't remember. I was desperate. The difference between evil and desperate, I said, is what you do after the first bad choice. You kept going. That landed. I saw it, because it was true. Daniel's phone buzzed once in his pocket. That was the signal from Ray. Patrol on the move. Less than 40 minutes from the time Vanessa walked in, officers were at the door. She heard the knock and went still in a way no innocent person ever does. One officer spoke to Daniel first, then to Vanessa, then stepped inside with the second while she started saying, "This is a misunderstanding," over and over, each repetition thinner than the one before. By the time they put cuffs on her, she was no longer crying. She was calculating. looking at doors, looking at windows, looking for the last version of the story that might still save her. There wasn't one. Daniel stood against the wall and watched without moving. I stayed where I was. When the door finally shut behind them, the house went quiet, in the ugliest way a house can. Not peaceful, hollow. Daniel turned to me and said, "You really were a detective?" I said, "Yes." He nodded once, slowly, like he was rearranging every year of his memory around that fact. "And you did all this without telling me?" "I did what Ruby needed." He looked down at the folder still open on the table, then back at me. "I thought justice would feel louder." I shook my head. "Real justice doesn't come with a soundtrack. It comes with paperwork and waiting rooms and court dates. It comes quietly. But it comes full weight." After Vanessa was taken out, Daniel stayed standing in that dining room like a man who had just watched the walls of his own life slide out of place. He did not cry right away. Some men don't. Some men go still first, as if the body knows the truth has to find somewhere to land before it can break anything open. The folder was still on the table between us. Pharmacy records, search history, times, false names, little paper bones from the skeleton of the thing she had built around Ruby for at least 8 months. Daniel looked at them, then at me, then toward the front door, where the sound of the squad car had already faded. "I don't know what happens now," he said. "Yes, you do," I told him. "Now you tell the truth every time somebody asks for it. Social workers, detectives, doctors, lawyers, judges. You tell it plain, and you don't decorate it because facts don't need help." He sat down slowly and put both hands over his face. I should have seen it. I let that sit there. I was not going to hand him mercy too early. Mercy given too early turns into a hiding place. "You should have," I said, "but Ruby doesn't need your shame tonight. She needs your discipline." He lowered his hands. His eyes were red, but now there was something steadier under the shock. "Can I see her?" "Tomorrow morning," I said, "when the caseworker clears it. And when you do, you go in calm. No apologies that make her comfort you. No questions that feel like interviews. You sit beside her. You tell her she is safe. You let her be 7. He nodded once. That was the first useful thing he had done since Tuesday. Ruby came to my place the next day with one small backpack, her stuffed elephant, and the kind of silence children wear when their bodies are still deciding whether the danger is over. The emergency placement papers had moved faster than most things move in this world, thanks to Dr. Allen's report, the urine tox screen, and the fact that once law enforcement sees a pattern around a child, they stop pretending time is harmless. A caseworker from Shelby County walked me through the basics at my kitchen table while Ruby sat on the couch under a quilt my late wife had sewn 15 years earlier. "No unsupervised contact," the woman said. "No off-record exchanges. No private calls unless approved. Document any behavioral changes, sleep disturbances, food refusal, nightmares, confusion, or statements related to the mother." "I will," I said. She looked around my house, at the old wood floors and the framed photos and the medication sorter next to my coffee maker. "Do you need support with pickup schedules, school transitions, or counseling referrals?" I glanced at Ruby. She was tracing one finger over the elephant's stitched ear. "I need everything that keeps this simple for her," I said. The caseworker nodded. "That's the right answer." Daniel came later that afternoon. He brought coloring books, new markers, a sweater she'd left at the house in Germantown, and a face that looked like it had not slept in 3 days. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her. Ruby looked up from the couch, held still for half a second, then lifted both arms. Daniel broke right there. Not loudly, just enough for the truth to come through. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her and put his face against her shoulder. "Hey, Peanut," he said, voice shredded almost beyond use. "Hey, baby." She touched the back of his neck with one small hand. "Am I in trouble?" she asked. Daniel shut his eyes so hard I could see it from across the room. "No," he said. "No, sweetheart. You are not in trouble. None of this is your fault. Not one bit. She thought about that in the solemn way children do when they are checking if an adult is safe enough to believe. "Can I stay with Grandpa?" she asked. Daniel looked over at me. I gave him nothing but a level face because that answer had to come from him. He turned back to her and said, "Yes. For now, you stay wherever you feel safe." She nodded and leaned into him, and I saw the first real sign that her body believed the worst part might be over. Not joy, not relief, just surrender to rest without fear. That matters more than people think. The detectives handling the case interviewed Daniel twice and me 3 times over the next 2 weeks. Child cases are like that. Nobody trusts one clean statement, and they shouldn't. Every time I sat down in one of those rooms with fluorescent lights and thin coffee and a legal pad in front of me, I went back to what mattered. Tuesday, October 14th, 2:15 in the afternoon. Purple gift bag. Juice box. Whisper. Collapse. Poplar Avenue Pediatric Clinic. Dr. Allen. 4 full seconds. At least 8 months. Ray Dobbins's work folded in where it had to. Pharmacy records under false names, cash purchases, search history about custody, life insurance, and chronic sedation in children. Daniel hated hearing it repeated. Good. Truth should hurt when you've let a child stand alone inside it. Vanessa's attorney tried early to float softer language into the file. Maternal exhaustion, misuse of over-the-counter sleep aids, anxiety-driven poor judgment, family stress. Every ugly act in America gets a better haircut once a lawyer touches it. But toxicology doesn't care about euphemisms, and neither do purchase trails. By the time the preliminary hearing date was set, the state had enough to stop pretending this was one panicked mother, one bad night from bedtime. This was pattern. This was concealment. This was sustained harm, dressed up as routine. Daniel asked me once, sitting at my kitchen table after Ruby had fallen asleep in the next room, "Do you think she ever loved her?" It was late. Rain against the window, midtown quiet. The kind of hour when people ask questions they cannot survive answered the wrong way. I took my time. "I think she loved what control felt like," I said. "I think she loved being the interpreter of Ruby to everyone else. The expert, the gatekeeper. Maybe she loved parts of the child too. People like that often do. But love that keeps choosing harm after the first warning isn't love you can build a life on." Daniel stared into his coffee. "I don't know how I married somebody I never really knew." "Most people don't marry a lie all at once," I said. "They marry it in chapters." He gave a short, hollow laugh. "You always talk like you're writing reports in your head." Occupational damage. He looked up at me then. "I still can't get over the detective thing." "You'll live." 27 years. "Yes." "And you never told me." I leaned back in the chair and looked toward the hall where Ruby was sleeping. There are parts of a man he keeps folded up, because bringing them into the house changes the air. I spent enough years seeing what people do behind closed doors. I didn't want my son growing up under that weather. He shook his head slowly. "Might have helped if I knew." "No," I said. "Knowing what I used to be would not have fixed what you chose not to see." He winced. I left it there. Truth does not always need padding. Ruby's recovery was not one straight line. That is another thing people who have never sat with harmed children don't understand. Safety does not arrive and stay just because danger leaves. Some nights she slept 12 hours. Some nights she woke at 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. and 4:17, wanting to know whether her juice was coming from the store or from the house. I started opening every drink in front of her, narrating it the way you narrate things to very young children. Orange juice from the fridge, sealed cap, Grandpa opening it now. Apple juice from the grocery store, you can hear the snap. Milk from the carton, no medicine, no powder, no sleepy stuff. After a while she stopped asking every time, then only sometimes, then mostly when she was overtired. Doctor. Alan saw her twice more over the next month, and once he looked across the exam room at me and said, "You're doing the right, boring things." I appreciated that. In my experience, boring things save more lives than dramatic things ever do. Keep records, keep routines, keep appointments, keep the child fed, hydrated, believed, and unhurried. Boring is holy work when somebody has tried to rearrange a child's reality. The court moved the way courts always move, too slow for the innocent, too fast for the guilty to keep up with their own rewrites. CPS recommended continued placement with me while Daniel pursued supervised reunification steps that would eventually allow Ruby to spend structured time with him outside my house. He accepted every requirement without argument: parenting classes, protective capacity evaluation, counseling, documentation review. I respected that. Pain does not mature a man automatically. Compliance does not either. But humility is a start, and he had finally met the part of himself that could either grow or rot. Vanessa's side tried for supervised contact first, then indirect contact through drawings and letters. The court denied it for the time being. Too much risk, too little insight. That was the phrase the evaluator used. Too little insight. Clean words for a filthy situation. Ray Dobbins checked in once after the arrest, mostly to make sure I was still upright and not trying to carry the whole city on my bad knee. We met in a diner downtown near the Westin one grey morning while Ruby was at school. He slid into the booth and said, "You look worse." "That's because I am worse." "Kid okay?" "Getting there." He nodded. "Then that's enough for now." I told him the case was holding. He told me Vanessa had apparently tried to explain the search history as research for a friend. We both sat there in silence after that, because some lies are too lazy even to deserve ridicule. Before he left, Ray said, "You know Daniel's never going to look at you the same again." "Good," I said. "Maybe he'll look harder at everyone." Ray smiled without humor. "Careful. That's how men like us are made." "Too late for me," I said. "Maybe not for him." The first truly good sign came on a Sunday afternoon, about 6 weeks after Ruby moved in. We were on the back porch, autumn light, leaves moving slow along the fence line. She was coloring at the little patio table, tongue pressed to one corner of her mouth in concentration, freckles sharp across her nose. I had made her apple juice and opened it in front of her without even thinking about it. She drank half, set it down, and went right back to coloring. No question, no check, no pause. That was when I felt something unclench in me that I had been carrying since she whispered in my ear at Daniel's house. "What are you drawing?" I asked. She held the page up. It was a crooked house, a yellow sun, a purple bag near a stick figure with one big knee drawn larger than the other. "That's you," she said. "I figured." She pointed at the porch. "And that's me, and that's my juice." I looked closer. There was a little blue square on the table. "Looks accurate." She lowered the page and said, very matter of fact, "I like when you open it where I can see." I swallowed once before answering, "I'll keep doing that." She nodded like the contract had been renewed and went back to coloring. Children do not always ask for healing in grand speeches. Sometimes they ask for a visible bottle cap breaking open in the room. Daniel improved too, though more slowly and less cleanly. He came by often, learned not to flood Ruby with questions, learned how to listen without chasing reassurance for himself, learned that being forgiven by a child and being trusted by one are not the same timetable. One evening, after helping her with a school worksheet at my kitchen table, he stayed behind after she went to brush her teeth. "You were right," he said, "about discipline." "Usually am." He almost smiled. I kept wanting her to tell me I'm still her dad, like I needed her to fix what I broke by not noticing. And that's not her job. No. He leaned both palms on the table and looked at me. "I still hate that you had to step in where I should have been." I shrugged. "That's what family is for when it's working right." He nodded slowly. "I want to earn this, not just survive it." "Then keep showing up in ways a child can count." He took that in. "You really think trust comes back?" I looked toward the hallway where Ruby was singing softly to herself, while she brushed her teeth. "Not all at once," I said. "Not because you want it. Because you become safe enough, often enough, long enough." The day Ruby laughed full force again caught me off guard. Real laugh, head back, whole body involved. It happened because I bent down to pick up her stuffed elephant and my knees snapped loud enough to startle us both. She stared for one beat and then burst into laughter so hard she had to grab the table. I laughed too, partly because of the sound my knee made and partly because the room finally had something in it besides vigilance. Daniel was there that afternoon. He looked at me over her head, eyes wet, and I knew he heard it too. Not just laughter. Return. Months later, when the hearings had multiplied into continuances and filings and all the slow machinery that follows private evil once it gets dragged into public light, Daniel asked me if I regretted anything about how I handled it. We were leaving the courthouse, both of us tired down to the bone, Ruby safe with a sitter from church who knew how to follow instructions and keep her world simple. I said, "I regret that I was 3 days late with a birthday gift." He looked over at me. "That's what you regret?" "Yes." Not the PI, not the confrontation, not the arrest. Lo. We stepped out into the parking lot. The late sun made everything look cleaner than it was. I regret that she had to whisper instead of speak normal volume to be heard by an adult who could do something. Daniel stopped walking. I kept going 2 more steps before I realized he wasn't beside me. When I turned back, he was standing there with his jaw tight, fighting something. Finally, he said, "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure she never has to whisper for help again." I looked at him a long moment, then nodded once. "That's the first thing you've said in months that sounds like a father." Ruby is older now than she was on that Tuesday in October, when I pulled into the driveway off Exeter Road at 2:15 in the afternoon with a purple gift bag on the passenger seat and pain in my knee. She still has freckles on her nose. She still likes grape juice least and apple juice best. She still keeps that stuffed elephant, though one ear is hanging by threads and the stuffing in the stomach has shifted to one side. Some evenings, when the light falls a certain way across my kitchen and she is sitting there doing homework while Daniel washes dishes without being asked, I think about Dr. Allen in that clinic on Poplar Avenue, about the way he read the paper twice and let 4 full seconds say what his mouth had not said yet. There are moments when a life divides clean down the middle, before the paper, after the paper, before the whisper, after the whisper, before you know what someone is capable of, after you know. People like to imagine justice arrives all at once, loud and cinematic, with the guilty stunned and the innocent restored in a single scene. That is not how it works. Real justice comes slower than anger and steadier than revenge. It comes with documented timelines and signed statements and hearings and waiting rooms and supervised calendars and the dull courage of repeating the truth until institutions finally catch up to what a child already knew. It comes quietly, but it comes full weight. By the time winter leaned over Memphis and turned the mornings sharp, the case had settled into its ugliest stage. Not the discovery, not the arrest, not the shock. Those things are violent in their own way, but they are clean compared to what comes after. What comes after is repetition, sworn repetition, professional repetition, the same facts carried from office to office until every person with a badge, a degree, or a bench has touched them and decided what they mean. That is where most people get tired. That is where guilty people hope decent people will start cutting corners. I never had much talent for cutting corners. Ruby was in school again by then, though not full days at first. Too much noise made her flinch. Unexpected questions made her fold inward. If a teacher raised a voice at another child across the room, Ruby's hands would stop moving for a few seconds and her eyes would go glassy, like some part of her had left to make sure the danger wasn't meant for her. The counselor at school called it hypervigilance. I called it evidence that a child's body remembers things adults wish could be filed away. So we adjusted. Shorter days at first. Same pick-up time whenever possible. Same cup in the morning. Same snack after school. Same seat at my kitchen table. Same small ritual with drinks. Cap opened where she could hear it. Seal shone where she could see it. "Apple juice from the store," I would say. "Grandpa opening it now." The repetition soothed her more than any speech ever could. Daniel started helping with pickups on Thursdays. The first few times, Ruby asked twice whether she would still sleep at my house afterward. He answered the same way every time. "Yes, I just came to see you and bring you home to Grandpa." No pressure, no wounded look, no grabbing for reassurance. He was learning, slow but real. Some men think redemption arrives the minute they admit guilt. It does not. It arrives when they stop making their guilt somebody else's burden to carry. Daniel had finally started to understand that. The preliminary hearing came on a Thursday morning, under a sky so flat it looked pasted there. Vanessa was brought in wearing county colours, her hair pulled back, her face stripped of every suburb-friendly softness she'd used like armour when this started. No cream sweater, no careful lip gloss, no apples on a plate. Just a woman and the sum of what she had done when nobody thought to watch closely enough. She looked over her shoulder once when they brought her in. Not at Daniel first, at me. That told me all I needed to know. Some people never fear the ones they hurt. They fear the one who named it correctly. The state's attorney laid it out without theatrics. Urine tox screen from Dr. Allen at the pediatric clinic on Poplar Avenue. Repeated sedative exposure, pharmacy records, false names, search history involving custody, life insurance, chronic sedation in children, melatonin detection in urine. Statements from Daniel, statements from me. Timeline from Tuesday, October 14th, starting at 2:15 in the afternoon with the birthday gift and ending with the police response less than 40 minutes after Daniel confronted her days later. When the prosecutor said Ruby's name aloud in that room, I felt my hand close around the wooden rail until the bad knee pain I usually notice faded into nothing. Daniel sat beside me in a suit that hung wrong, because grief changes the shape of a man faster than a tailor can. He never looked at Vanessa until the defense attorney stood up and tried to soften the edges of the thing. Maternal burnout, emotional collapse, inappropriate self-medication to induce sleep in a difficult child. I watched Daniel hear those words and go white in the face. Then I watched him do the best thing he had done since all this started. He stayed still. No outburst, no grandstanding, no giving the other side anything they could use to make the room forget who the victim was. After court, he followed me into the hallway and said, "How do they stand there and talk like that?" Because if they called it what it is too early, I told him, they'd lose the only game they know how to play. He looked back toward the courtroom doors. "It makes me sick." "Good," I said. "Stay sick enough to stay useful." Ray Dobbins testified later in the process, calm as old wood, walking the state through his findings the same way a man describes weather damage to a roof. Purchases in Midtown, cash receipts, pharmacy pickups using false names, search history, the pattern, the quiet accumulation. Ray had a gift for not sounding impressed by his own work, and juries trust that more than they trust cleverness. Outside the courthouse afterward, he lit a cigarette he wasn't supposed to have that close to the entrance and said, "You were right about one thing." "Only one?" I asked. "Noise would have ruined it." I looked across the parking lot at Daniel, who was on the phone with the caseworker, while leaning against his car like the whole day had been poured into his bones. Noise usually does. Ray took one drag, then ground the cigarette out under his heel. "Kid still sleeping better?" "Most nights." "Then that's the part that matters." "Yes." He studied me a second. "And you?" I laughed once. Nobody asks grandfathers that unless they already know the answer. He nodded. Fair enough. Ruby's world kept growing in careful inches. First, a sleepover in the guest room at my sister Grace's house one Saturday, because Grace had always been steady and knew how to follow instructions without acting insulted by them. Then a half day at a birthday party with Daniel there the whole time. Then soccer in the spring, though Ruby spent the first 2 games more interested in the dandelions near the sideline than the ball. I didn't care. Running mattered. Falling mattered. Coming up mad about grass stains instead of medication mattered. One afternoon after practice, she climbed into my truck holding a little paper trophy for Best Team Smile, and I looked at the juice box in her lap and realized she had already pushed the straw in herself without waiting for me to open it. I felt a flicker of worry first, then I caught myself. Healing does not ask permission from the adults protecting it. Sometimes it just happens while you're looking the other way. She saw me looking and said, "It's okay, Grandpa. Coach opened the box in front of me." Then she went back to telling me how one girl on her team had shin guards with glitter on them. That was the whole moment. 3 seconds maybe, but I kept it. Men like me keep small moments the way other people keep cash in envelopes. For the hard months, for the courtroom days, for the nights when the mind goes back and asks whether you missed something before the whisper. Daniel's path stayed rougher. He moved into a rental in Midtown after selling the house in Germantown because he couldn't stand the kitchen, couldn't stand the sight line from the doorway to the living room chair where Ruby had gone limp in my lap, couldn't stand the idea that walls can hold memory better than people. He told me once, carrying boxes out of that place, "Every room in this house feels like an alibi I should have questioned." I set down the lamp I was holding and looked at him. "Then let it be a house somebody else lives in. Brick doesn't deserve loyalty." He actually smiled at that, small and tired, but real. He started therapy because the caseworker told him to. Then he kept going because he realized being told to and needing to are sometimes the same thing in different clothes. One evening after Ruby had gone to bed, he sat at my kitchen table and said, "Do you think she remembers all of it?" He didn't say Vanessa's name. He never did unless paperwork forced him to. "Not in sequence," I said. "Children rarely do. But memory isn't only words. Sometimes it's taste, tone, a hallway, a color, the way somebody's hand comes into frame holding a cup." He stared at the grain in the table. "So even if she forgets the facts, her body keeps the file." "For a while," I said. "Then if we're careful, her body also keeps newer files, safe files." He looked up. "You really believe that?" "I've seen worse children than Ruby build good lives. Not untouched lives, but good ones." He let out a slow breath. "I don't know how you say things like that without sounding fake." "Practice," I said, "and age." The plea discussions began in late spring. I will not give you every legal detail because people who have never lived through a case like this imagine the courtroom is where the real ending happens, and it rarely is. The real ending happens in the boring aftermath, in whether the child starts sleeping through the night, in whether a parent finally stops centering himself, in whether a kitchen becomes a place for homework again instead of suspicion, in whether a juice box is just a juice box. Vanessa's side tried to avoid the language that would mark the case for what it was. The state didn't agree. Neither did the records, neither did Dr. Allen, neither did the timeline. In the end, the formal outcome mattered, yes. Charges held, restrictions held, contact stayed limited and supervised only on paper, never exercised in practice because the recommendations against it remained too strong. But the thing I remember most is not the disposition hearing. It is what happened afterward, when Daniel and I walked down the courthouse steps into the summer heat, and neither of us said anything for nearly a full minute. Finally, he looked at me and said, "I kept waiting for some feeling of finality." "There isn't one," I said. "There's just less danger than there used to be." He gave a tired nod. "That sounds depressing." "No, honest." He thought about that while we crossed the parking lot. "You know what I hate most?" he asked. "That she almost turned normal into the crime scene. Juice, bedtime, quiet afternoons, things a kid should never have to check for poison." I opened the truck door and rested one hand on the roof before getting in. "Then spend the rest of your life putting normal back where she left damage." He looked at me across the hood. "You make that sound simple." "Not simple," I said. "Repetitive. There's a difference." The anniversary of that Tuesday came around before I was ready for it. October again, same dry light, same slant of afternoon through the kitchen window. Ruby was 8 now, a little taller, front teeth grown in. Still freckles, still the stuffed elephant, though now it mostly lived on her bed, except when storms came through. She sat at my kitchen table doing spelling words, while Daniel stood at the counter making grilled cheese like a man defusing a bomb because he still approached ordinary fatherhood with too much concentration. Ruby looked up and said, "Grandpa, can I have juice?" For half a heartbeat, the room in me that remembers everything tightened. Then I said, "Sure, baby. Apple or grape?" She made a face. "Apple. Grape tastes weird." Daniel laughed softly at that and reached for the carton. Then he stopped and looked at me, not asking permission, not exactly, more like acknowledging history. I nodded once. He poured the juice in front of her, set the carton down where she could see it. Nothing ceremonial, nothing forced, just a father who had finally learned the shape of caution without turning it into fear. Ruby took a sip and went back to spelling. That was all. That was enough. Later that night, after she was asleep, Daniel sat on the back porch with me while the neighborhood settled into that hush houses get after 9. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't gone over that day?" he asked. "Yes." "Every day?" "Some version of it." He rubbed a hand over his face. "Me too." We sat with that a while. Finally I said, "It doesn't help to worship the alternate disaster." He glanced at me. "What does that mean?" "It means the bad thing that didn't happen because somebody intervened is not a temple. Stop kneeling to it." He looked down at his hands and then laughed once, tired and surprised. "You save your best lines for when I'm not ready." "That's because when you're ready, you don't need them." He leaned back in the chair and stared out at the dark yard. "You know, I used to think strength was the guy who kicks the door in." "Sometimes." "And now?" "Now I think strength is the man who notices something is wrong when a child whispers it, and then does the boring, ugly work all the way to the end." He nodded slowly. "I want Ruby to remember me that way." "Then keep earning the memory." On the first cold morning of that winter, Ruby came shuffling into the kitchen in socks and one of my old flannel shirts thrown over her pajamas like a robe. She climbed into the chair by the window and said, "Can you make the cinnamon oatmeal?" "I suppose," I said, "though my attorney advises against taking orders before coffee." She grinned. Daniel, already there because he had started showing up early on school mornings just to help with normal things, looked at me and said, "Still workshopping the grandpa jokes, huh?" "I'm aging into them." Ruby laughed, then reached for the juice in the fridge before I could move. She held it up and said, very matter-of-fact, "Dad, open this?" He took it, twisted the cap, handed it back, and she drank without even looking at the bottle. Sunlight came through the kitchen window and caught the little gold threads in her hair. There are moments you don't announce, because saying them out loud might make them step away. So I didn't say anything. I just stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal, listening to the spoon move against the pot, listening to Ruby talk about a spelling test, listening to Daniel ask if she remembered her library book, and I understood something I wish more people knew before tragedy teaches it to them by force. Justice is not the hearing. Justice is not the cuffs. Justice is not even the sentence. Those things matter. They matter a lot. But the deepest form of justice is when the child gets ordinary back. Breakfast, homework, soccer practice, safe sleep, a father who pays attention, a grandfather who opens the juice without being asked, and one day notices he no longer has to. That is the part nobody applauds. No soundtrack, no speech, no camera push-in, just a kitchen in Memphis. A girl with freckles on her nose, steam rising from cinnamon oatmeal, and peace, at long last, doing its quiet work with full weight. The last court date came and went without the drama people imagine. No thunderclap, no revelation nobody saw coming. By then all the revelations had already happened where revelations usually happen in cases like this. In clinics, in folders, in waiting rooms, in the look on a father's face when he finally understands what was happening under his own roof, and in the small, quiet habits of a child learning She does not have to be afraid of what is handed to her. The legal end was formal, necessary, heavy in the right ways. The findings held, the restrictions held, the record held. Vanessa's explanations, once stretched under sworn light, did what false stories always do when enough truth is put beside them. They shrank. Not because evil suddenly confessed in a noble speech. Evil almost never does that. It shrank because Dr. Allen had done his job on Poplar Avenue, because the urine tox screen did not blink, because Ray Dobbins had followed the pattern instead of the performance, because Daniel finally stopped protecting the wrong person, and because Ruby, at 7 years old, found the courage to whisper the one sentence that split the whole rotten thing open. After the final hearing, Daniel and I sat in the truck for a long minute without starting the engine. The courthouse behind us, midtown traffic ahead. The folder on the seat between us thinner now than it had been in the beginning, though no less ugly for being processed. Daniel looked straight ahead and said, "So this is it?" "No," I said. "This is the part where the state is finished talking. We still have to live." He let that sit there. "I used to think the end of something like this would feel bigger." "It already was big," I said. "You just felt the big part back when Dr. Allen went silent for 4 full seconds." He nodded once. Then he said, quieter, "I keep hearing that in my head. 4 seconds." "Me too." We drove home without the radio on. Ruby was at my place with Grace that afternoon, working on a school poster about planets. When we walked in, she was standing on a kitchen chair in one of Grace's old aprons, holding a blue marker, like she was conducting an orchestra. "Saturn needs more rings," she announced the second she saw us. Daniel smiled before he even had time to think about it. Real smile, not the strained one he'd been wearing for months. "That sounds serious," he said. "It is," Ruby told him. "Grandpa made the circles too fat." "I've always been weak on astronomy," I said. Grace snorted from the counter. "You've always been weak on anything that requires glitter glue." Ruby laughed and held up her paper. There were crooked planets, too much yellow on the sun, and a set of rings around Saturn that looked more like a stack of pancakes than anything NASA would recognize. It was perfect. Daniel set his keys down and moved beside her without hesitation, without asking whether she wanted him there, without crowding her either, just close enough to be useful. "Show me where the marker goes," he said. She handed it to him and went right back to explaining the solar system, as if the adults in the room had been waiting all day for the briefing. I stood there with one hand on the back of a chair and thought, this is how healing looks when it stops trying to impress anybody. Not speeches, not tears, not cinematic declarations. A child bossing her father around over Saturn's rings in a safe kitchen. That night after Grace left and Ruby was asleep, Daniel stayed at the table while I put away dishes. He watched me for a while and then said, "I owe you more than I know how to say." I kept stacking plates. "Then don't say more than you mean." "I mean all of it. You don't owe me for protecting Ruby." "Maybe not, but I owe you for doing what I should have done sooner." I dried my hands and leaned against the counter. "If you need to carry a debt, carry one that helps. Pay attention longer. Ask one more question than feels necessary. Trust unease sooner. That's useful debt." He looked down at the grain of the table and nodded. "I can do that." "You'll have to." He was quiet a moment, then he asked, "Do you think she'll remember me as the father who missed it, or the one who stayed after?" It was the kind of question that deserves the truth, not comfort. "Both, probably," I said. He let out a breath like he had been bracing for the answer. "Kids are not stupid. She may never line the facts up exactly in order, but somewhere in her, she will know there was a before and an after. The best thing you can do is make the after so steady it outweighs the rest." "Outweighs it?" he repeated. "Yes, not erases it, outweighs it." He sat there with that for a while, then finally stood up to leave. At the door, he turned and said, "You know, when you told me you were a detective for 27 years, I thought that was the biggest surprise of my life. And now?" He gave a tired half smile. "Now I think the bigger surprise is that you stayed soft enough to raise a family after seeing what people do." I looked past him toward the dark porch and the street beyond it. Soft is not the word I'd use. No? No. Measured. That got a real smile out of him. Measured, then. Ruby grew around the damage the way children do when enough adults finally decide to stop failing them. Slowly, unevenly sometimes, but for real. She turned 8, then 9. Her freckles stayed. Her laugh came back in full. The stuffed elephant lost more stuffing and somehow became more important because of it. She got taller. Her handwriting improved. She switched from asking me to open every bottle in front of her to opening most things herself, then looking up only once in a while out of habit, not fear. The first time she packed her own school lunch and dropped a juice box into it without checking the seal twice, I had to turn away for a second and pretend I was looking for the car keys. The body notices relief before pride catches up. Daniel changed too, not all at once, not cleanly, but real change almost never comes clean. He learned how to be boring in the ways children need. Pick-up times kept, promises kept, eyes up, phone down, questions asked without interrogation in them. He started noticing when Ruby went quiet in a room full of adults and stepping closer without making a scene. He learned that safety is not a dramatic gesture. It is 1,000 small, accurate ones. One Saturday in late fall, he took her to a bookstore in Germantown and brought her back with 3 chapter books, hot chocolate on her sleeve, and a school flyer she'd almost forgotten on the passenger seat. She ran inside talking about a story she wanted to read me later, and Daniel stayed on the porch while I held the door. She checked the drink once, he said quietly, at the cafe. And? I opened the lid, let her watch, and that was enough. I nodded. Good. He looked into the house, where Ruby was already calling for Grace on the phone to tell her about the bookstore. I don't think I understood before how much fatherhood is just proving the same thing over and over. Most worthwhile things are, I said. Then there was Dr. Allen. I saw him one last time by accident more than anything else. Ruby had a routine follow-up, nothing dramatic, just one of those ordinary appointments that feel miraculous after you've lived through the kind that aren't. He came in with the chart, looked at Ruby, looked at me, and smiled in that restrained way some men do when they have seen too much to waste emotion cheaply. You look brighter, he told her. Ruby, busy arranging stickers on the exam table paper, said, Grandpa says that's because I am no longer being poisoned. I closed my eyes for half a second. Dr. Allen did not miss a beat. Your grandpa sounds blunt. He is, Ruby said. Also old. That too, I said. Dr. Allen checked her vitals, asked his questions, made his notes, and before he left, he rested one hand on the chart and looked at me. She's doing well. I know. You did the right things. I thought about the clinic on Poplar Avenue, about the paper in his hand, about 4 full seconds, about how thin the line can be between suspicion and action. So did you, I said. He gave one small nod and left the room. Some people save a life with a dramatic move. Others do it by refusing to soften a sentence when the sentence has to be said plainly. Years passed. Not many. Enough. Enough for the house in Germantown to belong to someone else. Enough for Ray Dobbins to retire for real this time and send me a Christmas card every year with nothing inside but his name and sometimes a note that said, "Kid okay?" Enough for Grace to start pretending she did not spoil Ruby while actively handing her extra pie when she thought I wasn't looking. Enough for Daniel to become the kind of father who checked the back seat before driving off, who learned teacher names, who brought snacks no one had to distrust, who stood in school auditoriums and soccer fields and dentist offices like he understood attention was a form of love. One evening, long after the worst of it had been processed into memory and paperwork and scar tissue, Ruby sat with me on the back steps while the late light turned the yard gold. She was working on a homework assignment about heroes. I had not asked to see it because if a child wants to show you something, she will. If she doesn't, she won't, and pushing only spoils the thing. After a few minutes, she leaned against my arm and said, "Grandpa, Yeah? Do heroes have to be nice all the time? I looked down at her. No. Do they have to be strong? Sometimes. Do they have to know when something is wrong? That helps. She nodded like she was checking boxes on a list no adult was allowed to read. Then she handed me the paper. There were a few uneven sentences in pencil and a drawing at the bottom. The drawing was of a man with one knee bigger than the other, standing beside a little girl with freckles and a juice box in her hand. Over the picture she'd written, in careful block letters, "My hero is my grandpa, because he listened when I whispered." I read it once. Then again, because some things deserve the respect of a second look. "This is pretty good," I said, which was the best I could do without embarrassing both of us. She smiled and took the paper back. "I know." That was Ruby. Later that night, after she had gone to bed, and Daniel had picked her up for a Sunday breakfast and movie tradition they'd built together, I sat alone at the kitchen table with the house quiet around me and thought about everything that had happened since Tuesday, October 14th, 2:15 in the afternoon. The purple gift bag, the stuffed elephant, the juice box, Dr. Allen, Ray Dobbins, Vanessa, Daniel, 8 months, 4 full seconds, all of it. People use the word revenge too easily. They use it for any story where harm is answered by consequence. But revenge is about appetite, about feeding something hot inside yourself until it feels like justice, because it is loud. That was never what this was, not really. What I wanted was not noise. I wanted Ruby alive, clear-eyed, unafraid to drink what was handed to her, free to become more herself with every year instead of less. I wanted the truth documented so thoroughly it could not be smiled away by a woman in a cream sweater. I wanted my son forced to become the man his daughter needed. I wanted the law to move slowly and correctly and without sentiment until the weight landed where it belonged. If that sounds less satisfying than revenge to some people, fine. Let them keep their soundtrack fantasies. Real justice doesn't come with a soundtrack. It comes with paperwork and waiting rooms and court dates. It comes with boring mornings and watched bottle caps and doctors who do not flinch from the truth. It comes with a retired detective in East Memphis writing down times on a legal pad while his bad knee aches and his granddaughter sleeps safely in the next room. It comes quietly, but it comes full weight. And if you ask me what mattered most in the end, it was never the cuffs, never the hearing, never the record, though all of that mattered. What mattered most was this. A little girl with freckles on her nose grew old enough to stop whispering for help and start speaking at normal volume again. A father learned to listen before a crisis forced him to. A grandfather got to watch a juice box become just a juice box. That is enough. More than enough. That is the whole case, as far as I'm concerned.